today's video I'm going to be reading you guys a little story. It's just a little short story. I've done a couple of these before, so it's going to be, just mostly whispering. So I hope you guys enjoy. Okay, so previously I've done these videos with kind of like a green screen background thing, and I'm kind of like in character, but this time I figured I'd try something different and just read directly to you guys. Also, I don't know what happened to our stapler, if my parents took it on their vacation or whatever. I don't know why they would do that, but anyway, I couldn't find it, so what I decided was the best use of my time is to punch holes in it with a screwdriver. It was like a very narrow-headed like hex head, so I like punched holes in it and then bent wire and then folded it over on itself. So basically like made a staple just with wire. Anyway, okay, let's get to this. Let's get to this story. So I've been obviously I'm not a short story writer, so I've been using ChatGPT, but I found each time that I've made one of these, I've given it more and more specific of a prompt of what I kind of want. So it's been kind of cool to actually like see what kind of stories it comes up with based on what I give it. Most of them are alright, but obviously, it's only going to give you as good of a prompt as it's only going to give you as good of an answer as what you prompted. So ultimately, it's me not being a writer that's the problem. So okay, this story is in two parts, and the first part is called "The Weight He Carried." Let me scoot a little closer here. Hold on. Okay. I gotta get into this chair that I used to record is not super comfortable. Okay. Part 1, The Weight He Carried. The morning light broke slowly over the mountains, painting the peaks in strokes of pale gold. Jacob adjusted the straps of his pack at the trailhead, feeling the weight settle against his shoulders like an unspoken challenge. He had planned this trip for weeks, meticulously packing gear, double-checking maps, even running extra miles to build up his endurance. That's how he approached everything. Preparation, discipline, forward motion. The air was crisp, sharp enough to sting his lungs with the first few breaths. Pine needles scattered across the gravel path, and somewhere a creek murmured over smooth stones. Jacob glanced around once, no cars left in the parking lot, and then stepped onto the trail. It was just him and the quiet. At first, the solitude felt good. Each step was a steady rhythm, boots crunching over the dirt, breath rising and falling like a metronome. There was no phone buzzing in his pocket. No one was asking when he'd be done or what he'd do next. Out here, there was nothing to measure except the distance to the next bend in the path. The trail climbed gently at first, cutting between tall pines that filtered the sunlight into shifting patterns on the ground. Jacob stopped once to adjust his pack, letting his eyes wander to the ridges ahead. They looked endless, layered like waves frozen in time. He kept moving. I should say before we get too far into it, make sure you find yourself in a comfortable position, and if you have a nice bedtime beverage. I personally like some warm milk, because I like milk to begin with. And I've even done warm milk and honey, which is really good too. So if you'd like, you can pause the video and try that out. And so sure what the honey does, but I just like the flavor of it. Or maybe you're more of a tea person. I don't know. I know there's some teas that you can kind of drink before bed that are intended for sleep and not caffeination. Okay. Hours passed. The forest thinned, giving way to low shrubs and open spaces where the wind rolled across the land in cool, restless gusts. Jacob paused in a clearing, setting his pack down beside a flat stone. His legs ached, but not enough to stop him. He dug out of water, drinking slowly as his gaze swept over the valley below. It was beautiful, untouched and sprawling, but he felt an odd hollowness, as if the silence around him was almost too big. He remembered the last conversation he'd had with his brother a few weeks ago. "You're always doing everything on your own," his brother had said, half joking. "Ever let anyone help you out?" Jacob had laughed it off. "I'm fine, I like it that way." But now, sitting alone with the wind hissing through the grass, the memory made him shift uncomfortably. I'm actually going to take a drink of water myself. Oh my god, like you guys can hear how dry my mouth is. Okay. Oh, that happens about like half the time I take a drink, it feels like at this point. Okay. Sorry, back to the story. The trail grew steeper as afternoon settled in, the sun sliding behind the jagged peaks. Jacob found himself pushing harder, focusing on the crunch of gravel and the burn in his legs rather than the thoughts that tried to surface. Every now and then he caught himself thinking that he should have told someone where he was headed, just in case. But the idea felt like admitting weakness. He'd managed on his own for years. Why should this be any different? Still, there was something about the vastness of the landscape that made him feel smaller than he expected. The mountains didn't care how strong or independent he was. They just stood there, ancient and immovable, while he sweated and struggled to climb. The page flipping sounds are almost a little too aggressive for what I have the gain set at. By the time he reached the plateau where he planned to camp, the sun was a pale sliver sinking below the horizon. He dropped his pack, shoulders aching, and began setting up his tent. His hands moved automatically, but his mind kept drifting. The silence pressed in as the light faded. He gathered wood for a small fire, the dry branches snapping beneath his boots. When the flames finally caught, they cast a wavering orange glow over his campsite. Jacob sat with his back against a rock, staring into the fire, chewing on a simple meal of dried fruit and trail mix. The quiet was heavier now, like it had weight. He thought about how easy it would be to call someone, his brother, an old friend. But he didn't. He didn't even take his phone out of his pack. Instead, he leaned closer to the fire, listening to its steady crackle and wondering why being alone sometimes felt like both strength and punishment. The wind picked up during the night, rattling the walls of his tent. Jacob lay awake, staring at the faint shadow of the tree branches swaying against the fabric. He told himself he was fine, that this was what he came here for, to prove something to himself. But even as he tried to sleep, the thought nagged at him, why do I always need to prove it? The next morning, the world was quiet and damp, the grass wet with dew that sparkled like glass under the rising sun. Jacob packed up his gear and started hiking again, the chill of the air making him pull his jacket tighter around him. paused near a boulder to take a drink, looking at the path ahead. It snaked upward onto a hill between two peaks, sunlight spilling over the ridge like melted gold. He'd been alone for nearly 24 hours now, and while he told himself it was good, something in his chest tightened as the thought of spending another day without seeing another person. It was then, around a bend in the trail, that he saw two figures resting on a rock, their laughter carried faintly by the breeze. That's the end of part one. Oops, sorry guys. I feel like it's getting a little out of focus. Let's see. Oh man, who knows with this lighting? It's kind of hard to tell what I want. No, I guess I had it in a good spot. Okay, that was the end of part one. This is part two, the strength of open hands. The two hikers looked up as Jacob approached, the taller one shading his eyes from the afternoon sun. They weren't much older than him, maybe early 30s, but they had the easy confidence of people who are used to these trails. One of them raised a hand in a small wave. "Hey there," the taller man said. "Trail's a grind today, huh?" Jacob adjusted the strap digging into his shoulder. "Yeah, a little." His voice came out rough, like it hadn't been used in a while. He thought about moving on, about keeping his distance, but something about the way that they sat, unhurried, like they belonged to the place, made him pause. I'm gonna take another drink of water. "You're welcome to sit," the other said, patting a space on the boulder. "We're just taking a breather before the climb. I'm Nate. That's Eli." "Jacob," he said, his name sounding strange when he introduced himself out loud. "Thanks." He slid off his back, feeling his shoulders sigh with relief as he lowered himself onto the warm stone. They didn't talk much at first. The wind carried the smell of sun-baked pine and distant campfire smoke from somewhere down in the valley. Jacob watched a hawk circling above the ridge, its shadow gliding silently over the rocks. "You been out here long?" Nate asked eventually, fiddling with the strap of his boot. "Second day," Jacob said. "Just figured I'd get away for a while." He wasn't sure why the words came out like an apology. Eli gave a slow nod, like he understood more than Jacob had said. "Good place for that." The trail ahead was steep and uneven, and before Jacob knew it, he'd fallen into step with them. It felt easier somehow, the silence between them, comfortable rather than heavy. When they reached a narrow stream crossing, Nate offered a hand, not saying anything, just holding it out, waiting. Jacob hesitated, his pride sort of prickling. Then he took it, gripping tighter than he meant to, as if the gesture said more than either of them would admit. Dang, I just tried to do the teacher lick thing and it was actually just one page. Embarrassing. Later, when they stopped to rest by a ridge that overlooked miles of shadowed forest, Eli pulled out a dented thermos. "Coffee?" he asked, tilting it towards Jacob. Jacob started to shake his head but stopped. The smell hit him, rich, earthy, warm, and he found himself nodding. "Yeah, thanks." They passed the thermos around, not speaking much. The view stretched out before them, deep valleys, glowing faintly gold under the setting sun. It struck Jacob how rare it was to just sit with people like this, with no agenda, no need to fill the silence with words. By the time they reached a clearing that evening, the light had gone soft and blue. they decided, without really deciding, to camp together. Eli gathered wood while Nate sorted through his pack, and Jacob stood there for a moment, unsure of how to join in. He'd almost said he'd be fine building his own fire. He always did things alone, but instead he knelt beside Nate, helping him stack stones to shield the flames. "Looks solid," Nate said with a quick grin. "Yeah," Jacob replied. He realized a beat later that he liked the way it felt, working side by side without having to prove anything. When the fire was burning, they ate quietly, trading only a few stories. Nate told one about an early trip gone wrong, about waking up to find their tent half collapse under unexpected snow. Eli laughed, the sound of low and warm and low and warm, and Jacob felt a flicker of something inside him, like the crackle of the fire warming a place he didn't know had gone cold. The conversation eventually faded, leaving the night sounds to fill the air. The chirps of insects, the wind whispered through tall grass, the occasional crack of firewood. Jacob found himself staring into the flames, his thoughts circling. Eli glanced at him once, not probing, just noticing. "Long day," he said softly. "Yeah," Jacob murmured. He wanted to say more, but he didn't know how to start. The words kind of stuck in his throat, so instead he just nodded when Nate handed him a fresh log for the fire. The small shared tasks felt like enough. The next day, the trail grew harder. Steep climbs with loose shale and sudden switchbacks. Jacob's legs burned, and for a moment, he thought about letting them go ahead. But when he slowed, Eli fell into a step beside him without comment, adjusting his own pace. "Almost there," Eli said, not with the tone of a cheerleader, but as if he had been there himself and knew how heavy the climb could feel. Jacob found himself grateful for the words, even if he didn't say it. At a particularly tricky section where the path narrowed and dropped off into a ravine, Nate reached back with his hand. Jacob hesitated, the same stubborn voice whispering in his head, "You can do it." But when he saw the quiet patience on Nate's face, the unspoken "I'm here if you need it." Jacob took the hand. He didn't say anything, but he didn't let it go right away either. That evening, the three of them camped again beneath a sky that looked like the black velvet scattered with pinpricks of light. They sat by the fire, and for once, Jacob didn't feel like the silence needed to be filled. He could feel the presence of the others like a steady warmth. No performance, no need to pretend. As the fire burned low, Nate leaned back on his hands. "Funny things about these trips," he said. "You come out here thinking you're testing yourself. Turns out it's not just about that. It's something else, I guess." Jacob looked at him, but didn't ask what he meant. He didn't have to. He thought of his own quiet struggles, the way he'd built his life around being unshakable, and how strangely good it felt to just sit there, tired and imperfect, but not alone. When they parted ways the next day, the goodbye was simple, just a handshake, a quiet "take care out there." But as Jacob walked alone again, he realized something had shifted. The silence didn't feel as heavy anymore. It wasn't proof of his strength or his independence. It was just space. Space he could share with others if he wanted, and maybe he thought that was the point all along. And that is it. Fairly quick read. I think I usually get to about 20 minutes, but yeah, I think I kind of wanted to write about that specifically. If you thought the dialogue or the monologue, I guess, was kind of overhammered, believe me, it was even more obvious before. And I told it, hey, I know that was kind of the message that I want you to deliver, but could you perhaps weave in other elements of plot so it's not just, repeating the same thing over and over? But yeah, that is kind of the point I wanted to get across, because there's a fruit fly in my room. Because it's certainly something that I've noticed more recently. But yeah, just wanting to, and I've talked about this in other videos too, but just feeling like you're doing a lot sometimes, and how it's okay, and doesn't mean that you're any less than or weak if you accept help from others. And I wanted to try and kind of touch on more of kind of the vulnerability it takes, and the love and unity that you can get from working with others, not even just like in a way where they're helping you, but just like letting people in, I guess, too, but I don't know. I'm sure a lot of guys kind of grow up to feel a similar way, where you want to be able to do everything yourself and not need help for anything, especially with mental health stuff. So, on that note, I hope you're all doing something for your physical